Doctor, when you settle in, if you could please state your full name for the record.
Dr. Elizabeth McMahon, M.C.M.A.H.O.N.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Florida, master's degree in psychology from Purdue University, a doctoral degree in psychology from the University of Florida, and a 1.5 year postdoctoral training in the areas of neuropsychology and forensic psychology.
What is neuropsychology?
Neuropsychology is the study of brain behavior. It's how the brain functions as measured by various assessments of behavior.
And Doctor, if you could define forensic psychology for us.
It's that area of psychology which overlaps with the law, which applies psychological principles to the legal field.
And as I understand it, you are also a clinical psychologist.
Neuropsychology and forensic psychology are both subspecialties within clinical. My doctoral degree was in the area of clinical with the subspecialties.
And what is clinical psychology?
It's a study of behavior, more specifically human behavior, and more specifically the most pathological of human behavior. That is, it treats of those areas which are most deviant from the norm in terms of assessment, diagnosis, and treatment.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in clinical psychology as the broad area with the 2 subspecialties?
First of all, I interned at a mental health outpatient clinic in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I then remained there for a 1.5 years as director of their emergency and commitment unit, doing crisis intervention and commitments under the Baker Act. Following the awarding of my doctoral degree, I returned to the University of Florida for my postdoctoral work, and then remained at the University of Florida for 2 years on the faculty of the Department of Clinical Psychology, teaching, particularly assessment in the graduate program, that is personality assessment in the graduate program, coordinating the outpatient psychiatric unit, psychological unit, and supervising interns and practicum students. I then went into private practice for 10 years, during which time I taught in the criminal justice program at the University of Florida as an adjunct professor, and at this time hold a courtesy appointment in the Department of Psychiatry, where I'm a guest lecturer in psychiatry at the School of Law and the Department of Clinical Psychology. In 1987, I went to Seattle, remained there for 3 years, working with the state attorney's office and as the court evaluator on a psychiatric inpatient involuntary commitment unit. It was a 32-bed unit of severely psychotic individuals who'd been involuntarily committed, and I was the court evaluator for that unit. During that time, I was also adjunct professor teaching assessment to 3rd-year medical students at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in Seattle, John Vestier College, and worked as the neuropsychologist on a year study of HIV-positive individuals in terms of how that might or might not be affecting their cortical functioning. In 1990, I returned to Florida and have returned now to private practice. Most of my practice is in the area of forensics. Most of my work is doing diagnostics because that's what I like the most, and I do some adult psychotherapy.
Are you licensed, doctor?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell me a little bit about your licensing?
I'm licensed in the state of Florida. I was licensed in Washington during the time I was there. Relicensed in the state of Florida at the present time.
Have you published in the area of psychology and/or neuropsychology and/or forensic psychology?
Yes. I have 2 chapters in textbooks dealing with the area of neuropsychology as it applies to the legal arena. I have done fairly extensive research in the area of individuals who receive the death penalty versus life in prison. I have written in that area. It is currently somewhat in litigation in that some defense attorneys in the state of Florida blocked the publication of the work, feeling that it would be...
Objection, Your Honor. As to what other attorneys might think.
Go ahead.
on their basis was that it would be used by the state in support of the death penalty, and they would like for it not to be published. It will be published, but it's being delayed. And I have another article coming out now subsequent to the work on with the AIDS project in Seattle in the Journal of Naturopathic Medicine.
Have you been appointed by an expert witness in the courts of the state of Florida?
Yes.
Have you been retained as an expert witness by the defense in criminal proceedings? Have you been retained as an expert witness in civil cases?
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about your experience with the state attorney's office in Seattle. Have you been retained as an expert witness by the prosecution in criminal proceedings?
Yes, I am currently involved in a case with the prosecution in the 8th Judicial Circuit right now.
And have you testified previously before Judge Guam?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, we would tender Dr. McMahon as an expert in the areas of psychology, clinical psychology, neuropsychology, and forensic psychology.
You may inquire, counsel.
Just very briefly, if I may. Mr. McMahon, when you say doctor, we're not talking about a medical doctor, are we?
I'm not a physician. I'm a doctor, not a physician.
Okay, you're a doctor much as an individual who has got their PhD in English or philosophy and published a doctorate who get a doctorate. You can't prescribe drugs, can you?
No.
If a patient came to you or a client came to you for some type of treatment, you'd have to send them elsewhere if they needed medication. True?
I would make that assessment, and if I felt they needed that evaluation, I would send them elsewhere for that part.
You cannot prescribe drugs, correct?
No, I do not.
When you say licensed, you're not licensed as a medical doctor.
No,
Not licensed to prescribe drugs.
that's correct.
And there is a difference between a psychologist then and a psychiatrist, to the extent that a psychiatrist has a medical degree.
Oh, there are many other differences.
Okay, all that's only one of many.
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you were currently retained as a state expert, or are you under subpoena as an expert or as a witness?
According to the letter, I'm being retained as an expert.
Is that a case involving a death penalty?
Yes.
Prior to this occasion, have you ever testified on behalf of the state of Florida or any state as a state expert on behalf of the death penalty in which you advocated the death penalty was appropriate?
Objection to advocated, Your Honor. That's an improper question to an expert.
Rephrase your question.
Would I be correct in understanding that this is the first case you have ever been retained in the field of psychology by the state of Florida
No.
as a prosecution witness?
No.
You have previously testified and qualified as an expert on behalf of the state?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Question begin.
An improper voir dire as well, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Answer the question again.
Your question was I ever retained by the state in a death penalty case?
My question, ma'am, have you ever testified on behalf of the state in a death penalty case?
I believe so.
Which case was that?
I don't even remember the gentleman's name. It was a homicide in the 8th Judicial Circuit. I don't remember his name. It was several years ago. It was prior to, I was originally retained by the defense, it was prior to the penalty rule. I was originally retained by the defense and then called by the state to testify.
You've been primarily a defense expert in your career, is that correct?
I am obviously called by the state, retained by the defense because they're the only ones who can have a confidential expert to do the evaluation. As far as being primarily a witness for them, less than 20% of the cases.
How many times have you been qualified as an expert in the state of Florida in the field of psychology?
Oh, I have no idea. Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yes.
How about in a death penalty case?
Probably.
Would I be correct in saying no more than 2 times? Based
The
on
witness can answer the
No.
question.
Let the lady answer the question.
No. I've been retained, I've been qualified in death penalty cases Probably 25, 30 times.
It's your testimony that you qualified 25 times and testified as an expert in death penalty cases?
Yes. I think as near as I can remember, that would be right. I'm going on the basis of the published research that I have, and I've done well over 100 and some first-degree homicide cases.
In each of those cases, when you qualified, was that as a defense expert testifying on behalf of the criminal defendant?
All but 2 or 3 at the most.
So out of 25 some odd times, you testified 22 to 23 times as a defense expert.
Objection is a defense expert, Your Honor. It's who calls a witness appointed by the court.
Not necessarily appointed by the court as a confidential expert, Your Honor. And nothing further, Your Honor.
May proceed.
Doctor, how many clients have you seen in your career in a criminal setting?
Hundreds. I don't know. I've been doing this for 17 years. I don't know.
How many times have you been appointed by a court in a criminal setting? Just an estimate.
Yeah, I'd say probably 40% of that time by the court.
Do you have lists and logs of who you've seen through the years and where you've testified through the years and things like that?
No, I admit I probably should sit down and go through the files and be able to answer this more explicitly. I never have, and so I don't.
How many defendants did you evaluate for the prosecution in Seattle?
Objection, Your Honor. Is any relevancy of the death penalty?
No rule.
I did very little private work up there. I did one case for the state and one case for the defense.
And
that I
those
was
were?
called in by each.
And those are homicide cases?
Yes, the one for the defense was, state was, the one for the defense was, I think, battery, assault and battery, and larceny of an automobile.
You are familiar with what a psychiatrist does, are you not?
Yes,
You have worked with psychiatrists in the past, have you not?
yes,
Can a psychiatrist provide personality testing to an individual?
no,
Is a psychiatrist qualified to provide neuropsychological testing to an
Your Honor,
individual?
I'm going to object to outside the scope of her expertise as to what a psychiatrist is capable of doing.
You can answer the question if you can. That's no rule.
no, they're not trained to do neuropsychological testing.
Is a psychiatrist licensed to provide intelligence tests to an individual?
No,
When a psychiatrist wants to obtain testing to find out what the individual's functioning is from neuropsychological, from personality, from intelligence testing, who did the psychiatrist send that person to?
they have to send them to a clinical psychologist.
And have psychiatrists send patients to you in the past?
Yes,
How often? Withdrawn, is that a common thing?
yes,
Are psychiatrists trained in medical school as to psychological testing? Are
No.
they trained to administer it?
no,
Your Honor, we would tender Dr. McMahon again as an expert in those areas.
Any further for our?
No, sir.
You may proceed.
Doctor, do you know Lee Wuornos, the person seated to my right?
yes, I do.
Can you tell us how it is that you know him?
I was called by Lee's attorney, Ms. Jenkins, and asked to evaluate her. I met with Ms. Wuornos. I have met with her on 5 different occasions for a total of approximately 22 hours. I met with her on February 26th for 6.5 hours of neuropsychological and personality testing. I met with her on March 8th for 6.5 hours of interview. I met with her on December 23rd, and those are all 1991, for 4 hours of interviewing. I met with her on January 8th for 4 hours of interviewing, and I met with her on January 19th for 1 hour of interviewing, and a supplemental test.
Did you, during your evaluation of Ms. Wuornos, have the opportunity to review documentation regarding her life?
A great deal.
Would those include depositions in this case?
Yes.
Would those include statements of witnesses?
Yes.
Those include school records regarding Ms. Wuornos?
Yes.
Statements from members of her family?
Yes.
Statements from individuals who had come in contact with her in the past?
Yes.
Prior psychological or psychiatric evaluations?
Yes, both.
Have you had an opportunity to speak to any individuals who have been in contact with Ms. Wuornos in the past?
Yes, 2.
Did you also have the opportunity to review the testing and the notes of other doctors who have seen Ms. Wuornos currently?
Yes, I have.
Did you also have an opportunity to review various police reports regarding this case?
Yes.
And did you have an
Let me
opportunity?
say investigative reports, that's what you mean?
Investigative reports.
Yes.
Are the materials which you reviewed materials upon which an expert would normally rely in formulating an opinion?
Yes.
And you indicated you also tested Ms. Wuornos.
Yes, I did.
Did you provide neuropsychological testing to her?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
Well, there were several reasons. I was aware before I went to see Ms. Wuornos that I had been informed by her attorney that she had some history of alcohol ingestion. That would be one reason. Very early on when I first went to see Ms. Wuornos, she was telling me that there were things she could not remember, that she felt confused about the incidents. So I would do it for that reason. In any forensic evaluation, one of the things I'm always going to assess, in addition to intellectual functioning, is memory. Just to either rule in or rule out anything the defendant says they can or cannot remember. And that's also part of the assessment in terms of competency to stand trial, to make sure that they can remember adequately, enough to at least cooperate with their attorney. So for all of those reasons, I would have done it. And certainly once I was aware of Ms. Wuornos' life history, I would do a neuropsychological.
Why that?
Because of her history of alcohol ingestion, because of one or more instances of physical altercations resulting in some sort of head trauma or head injury. Once I obtained her school records, looking back on her school records, early testing, I would certainly then want to get current testing on it.
And you indicated, I think, that neuropsychological assessments deals with impairments of the brain and the cortex. Well, you straighten me out. What does it deal with?
It's cortical functioning, and if there's an impairment, most likely it is in the cortex. There can be times when the impairment is subcortical and it's having an effect on the cortex. So we're measuring cortical functioning, but if there's an impairment, it may be at a deeper level and but is simply causing the effect on at the cortical level.
Did you also provide intelligence testing to Ms. Wuornos?
Yes, I did.
Is intelligence testing something that goes along with the neuropsychological testing?
Yes.
Did you also provide personality testing to Ms. Wuornos?
Yes, I did.
And what is personality testing?
It's an attempt to assess various levels of the personality. Now, that's a very complex phenomena, and there's always the feeling that we don't know everything that there is to know about it, certainly. But we do try and assess at as many levels as we can with as many types of, not really tests, but what are called projective procedures. They're not tests because there's no right or wrong answer. But they're what's called projective procedures, and by that I mean that the stimuli for them are fairly vague, and so however the individual responds it is coming from within them because there's very little, it's a very amorphous stimuli, so they can do most anything they want with the stimuli. They're simply asked to respond to it. And with the idea that however they respond, that's what's coming from within them as opposed to what's being determined from the outside.
And you also provided objective personality testing.
Yes.
Do not. These tests, both the projective and the objective tests, are they empirically based? In other words, when you interpret them, do you have empirical norms that are used to do that?
Yes.
And what is that? Just real briefly describe that for me.
They have been given to hundreds and at this point thousands of people. There are individuals whose sort of work is to keep updating what's called the norms, and that is if we take people who have no diagnostic psychiatric diagnosis, who appear to be the average individual in the street, how would they answer? And then we look at people who are diagnosed, let's say schizophrenic, how would they answer? And we look at people who are diagnosed, say, manic depressive, how would they answer? We look at this over various age ranges and over various educational levels. And by that way, we have some idea of the manner in which various groups of people would answer. Any given individual that we assess, then we look at against that sort of a background and say, are they within normal limits? Are they outside normal limits? If they're outside, what does that mean? What do they look like in terms of normative data?
As a result of the testing, your review of records, and your face-to-face examination and evaluation of Ms. Wuornos, were you able to formulate any opinions with regard to her mental health function?
Yes.
Were you able to formulate those opinions to a reasonable degree of psychological and neuropsychological certainty?
Yes.
What is Ms. Wuornos' diagnosis?
I would have two. One is that she does evidence a mild degree of cortical dysfunction. By that I mean that it is mild. There's no, if you were to meet Ms. Wuornos on the street and carry on a conversation with her and that was the only problem she was having, you would not recognize it, probably. In other words, it would take some testing to pick it up. It is that mild. It is primarily in the area of language. In other words, it's more left side of the brain than the right. But it is diffuse, and by that we mean it's throughout the brain. It is not something that is a function of what's called a penetrating trauma or such as a severe head injury. It's not something that is compatible with like a tumor, a stroke, what's called a space-occupying lesion. It is called chronic static, meaning it has been that way for a long time. It will continue to be that way. It doesn't change. It's mild, it is diffuse, but it's more on the left side of the brain. It causes her some problems. It interacts with her, with other problems that she has, but that in and of itself is quite mild.
What was the other diagnosis that goes along with the cortical dysfunction?
I would diagnose Ms. Wuornos as what's called a borderline personality disorder. By that I mean an individual who engages in intense and unstable interpersonal relationships, who is very labile in their emotions. By that I mean roller coaster. 1 minute happy, 1 minute sad, 1 minute angry, 1 minute laughing, 1 minute just very rapid change of emotions. Who is impulsive, who has a great deal of trouble with intense anger and not being able to modulate that well, who may engage in self-destructive behavior, either very overtly in terms of suicidal attempts or more subtly in terms of lifestyle, who has an identity disturbance, and by that one may mean either, and in this case, either what's called a gender identity disturbance or disturbance in terms of more long-range goals, values, what they want from life. who experiences chronic feelings of emptiness and alienation, and who has a great fear of aloneness and abandonment. These are people who have what's called impaired cognition in terms of the way they both view the world and the way their thought processing operates. They have very intense, overwhelming feelings that they have a great deal of trouble modulating. And their life tends to revolve around the two primary themes of victimization and alienation or emptiness. I can go into more detail, but that's sort of a thumbnail description of what is a borderline personality. They are people who are difficult to deal with because they tend to be somewhat unpredictable, and we frequently have a difficult time dealing with their intense emotional reactions, which are so variable. One of the things about borderlines is that they tend to incite strong feelings in other people who are around them, and they tend to wear out therapists. And on an inpatient unit, you keep the census of borderline personality disorder individuals to no more than 4, or they will turn your unit upside down. So they're difficult people to deal with. They're extremely unhappy people, and they tend to project that unhappiness onto the world.
What can you tell us about Eileen's life and her background that is consistent with this disorder? May be a causative factor or that speaks to it.
The primary theories of how borderline personality develops are 3. One is that there is some cortical dysfunction, so that the individual has a great deal of trouble assessing and integrating the cognitive, the emotional, the behavioral, the social. They sort of never are able to assess what's going on around them accurately, integrate it, and learn to deal with it. That's one theory. The second theory is that there's very early abandonment. And a third theory is that the family dynamics are such that make for what's called splitting. As I understand Aileen Wuornos' history, looking through all of the immense amount of material and talking to people, she was born after her parents had separated. Her parents had divorced. She never knew until subsequent to her arrest who her father was. The reason being that he was later imprisoned and committed suicide, and the family never wanted to have anything to do with him or to never talk to either of the children about him, either Ms. Wuornos or her brother, and in fact changed the brother's name later because he had the same name as his father. His name was later changed because of that. Her mother, who was very young at the time, in her late teens, abandoned Ms. Wuornos and her brother. In essence, went out to dinner one night and did not return. Calling Ms. Wuornos' grandparents and saying, "You come pick the children up, I'm leaving town." She and her brother were picked up by their grandparents and adopted by them. She did not know she was adopted until somewhere between the ages of 7 and 10. I'm going to refer to her adoptive parents as her grandmother and grandfather because it just makes it easier for me. So she was raised by her grandparents, she and her brother, and assumed that the aunt and uncle were her brother and sister until she was somewhere between 7 and 10 years of age. Her aunt then told her that she was not her sister, but rather her aunt, and she went to her grandmother and asked, and the grandmother said that was true. She was raised in a home with a father figure who drank heavily, who worked all the time but drank, to the point of falling asleep on the floor or the couch. who has been described as a Jekyll and Hyde when he drank. He was very kind, very patient man when he was sober, but very sharp, angry man when he drank. Ms. Wuornos' biological mother has described him as the meanest man in town, that he was verbally abusive to her growing up. Ms. Wuornos' biological mother has also said that...
Without objection, we're going outside the scope of any medical testimony. We're bringing strictly hearsay from an uncalled witness now.
Doctor, as to the information that you're testifying to, is this information that an expert would normally rely upon in formulating an opinion?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Ms. Wuornos describes her grandmother in terms like an angel. She was wonderful. She could do no wrong. She loved flowers and trees and there's the split. There's a good mother, bad father split here. Ms. Wuornos' biological mother describes her mother as not being that way at all, but rather as also being verbally abusive. Have no way of knowing which perception is accurate. Maybe both are accurate at different points in time. In any event, certainly her grandfather was the rule of the household, and the grandmother was very much subservient to him. This was the home in which she grew up. At the age of 9, she and her sister were playing with a chemical that one of the brothers, either her biological brother or her uncle, had made, which when lighted made sort of little poof sounds and went up in smoke. They were in a shed, and apparently Ms. Wuornos dropped the bottle. It broke, and her sister said, well, there's very little there, go ahead and light it, which she did. Somehow or other, something went wrong, and it exploded in her face, and she had burns over her face and hands. This had quite an effect on her. She was hospitalized for several days and then out of school for several months, and very concerned about scarring and how that would affect her later on. She did well in school early on, but then along junior high school began to have trouble. You can see her grades, see her testing from the 3rd grade, where she tests out with an IQ of 107, go along a few years more, and her grades have dropped to the mid-90s. Her test scores have dropped to the mid-90s. And by the time she's 14 years of age, we see an IQ where she has a dramatic split in IQ between right-sided brain functions and left-sided brain functions. So the split that we see as an adult was evident back at the age of at least 14.
Let me just stop you there. Was there an interplay between her school performance and the family situation?
One would certainly assume that, and the test, the report.
Assumption, Judge.
That's no rule.
The psychological report indicates that on the first day, indicates first of all that she tried very hard on the tasks. So we assume that it was a valid and reliable reflection of how she was doing at the time. But that I think the second day that she began to be more comfortable and start talking about difficulties that she was having, that she did not like school, that she was having difficulty interacting with peers, and that by this time she was having difficulty interacting with siblings at home. She is characterized at that point 14 years of age. She's characterized at that point as beginning to not only have difficulty in school. Let me back up a minute. Her school records also reflect from the very beginning that she had difficulty with vision, and she's got 1 ear, I don't remember which ear, the hearing loss. And that she always had to be seated in the front of the room because of the hearing loss, and that her grandmother was asked repeatedly to get her professional help for this, and that she refused to do so, feeling that Ms. Wuornos was simply didn't want to take direction, didn't want to listen, but that there really wasn't anything wrong with her. She has a documented hearing loss and documented vision problems. Okay, at the age of 14, Ms. Wuornos was raped by a gentleman who said that he was a friend of her father's, offered her a ride home in town, said that he had just left a bar and just left her father at the bar, and that he offered her a ride home. Took her into the woods, offered her a beer. According to Ms. Wuornos' story, had a weapon. She agreed with him that if he would just put the weapon away, she would not try and run or anything.
Doctor, let me just stop you for a moment. Is Ms. Wuornos' account regarding that incident confirmed by sources independent of her?
Yes.
And did you have a chance to review those sources?
Yes.
That information. Keep going, I'm sorry.
Could counsel enlighten us as to what sources the doctor is referring to?
We can do that, Judge. They could save it for
I'll do it
cross,
cross, Judge, that's fine.
but Doctor, give us some of the sources and give us what they said.
There are records when she went to a later school saying that she had been raped earlier. There's also a statement given to an investigator up north by her sister saying that she had been raped at a very early age.
How old was she at the time? About 14 or so?
Ms. Wuornos would say 13 to 14. If I've put everything together, putting all the records together, she would have been just 15 when she delivered the child, so she would have been 14 at the time she was raped. She was 15 February 26th, and she delivered early March, or March 24th.
And this is the child resulting from this incident?
Yes, from this incident, she became pregnant. Did not tell anybody for 6 months because of being afraid of their reaction. And then her father sent her to a home for unwed mothers. She delivered, and the child was placed for adoption. Ms. Wuornos returned to school, finished out that school year according to her records. At some point in that summer, she ran away from home. She will say that her father had been abusive to her, physically abusive at that point, certainly verbally abusive, all the way through their statements of him saying to both Ms. Wuornos and her brother that they never should have been adopted, that he wished they could take them out in the backyard and shoot them, hang them from trees, that they were more trouble than they were worth. This was the constant thing that she grew up with. She ran away from that in the summer of 1971, was gone approximately 2 weeks when she learned of her grandmother's death. Returned for the funeral, and the following day was picked up by the police and sent to a training school. Subsequent to her release from the training school, somewhere within the next 6 to 8 months, she returned home, and 2 weeks later her father told her to leave, and she was on the streets. She then traveled around. She was then 15. She was on the streets on her own, traveled around, returning home maybe once every 2 or 3 months, and that how often she returned home varies in terms of whose account.
Where did she sleep?
In the woods in a tent, in abandoned cars, in any place that she could find, and with some neighbors at one point. People talk about her being around town in other towns nearby and around that town, on the streets late at night, and then sleeping wherever she could, and then eventually left the town.
I need a moment.
Began hitchhiking.
Did she ever return to school?
No, never returned to school. So she completed the 9th grade, and that's the end of her formal education. This time also was beginning to drink and was into drugs of all types. I believe everything except heroin. And increasing in her ingestion of alcohol. Began hitchhiking around the country. From Michigan, which is where she was raised, to Colorado, Florida, back to Colorado, back to Michigan, generally on the move. States that her primary ways of getting income were hustling pool, odd jobs, and prostitution. Ms. Wuornos stated to me that she'd been a prostitute from the ages of 15 to 20. and that was her prime source of income at that time. And during that time, she got into a number of scrapes with the law.
When she started hitchhiking at 15, did she have any skills?
None.
Do her school records reflect any training that she could go out and use to find employment?
No. And what jobs she did have throughout her life have been things like lawn maintenance, motels, waitressing, unskilled labor.
At the age of 15, did she have the borderline personality disorder?
My hesitancy is because, yes, though we don't like to label teenagers with that kind of a label.
Why is that?
That tends to be a heavy-duty label, and we tend not to want to do that to children or adolescents in the hopes that sort of maybe something will change and they'll grow out of it. So frequently at that age, one would see adjustment reaction of adolescence with mixed features or some sort of diagnosis like that. We try very hard not to put adult-type labels on children and adolescents. So did she have it? Yes, she had it, but would she have been diagnosed at 15? Probably not with that label.
Did she have the cortical dysfunction at age 15?
Yes, that's definitely obvious in her school records and testing.
You indicated her school records prior to 15 showed a verbal performance IQ split that is consistent with current testing.
It's even more severe than most of the, well, it's very compatible with one of the recent testing, and it's a little bit worse than the split that I got. By the same token, it's all in the same ballpark. We've got a split that's beyond anything that's within normal range. So.
What's the significance of that, the split between her verbal IQ and her performance IQ? What does that tell a clinician?
A split in either, and of that magnitude in either direction tells us that the brain is not working in concert. One of the things that is necessary for us to function in the world well is for our brain to work in unison. It must work in concert. It must work as a whole. It's sort of like an orchestra. It either all the parts are in unison or they're not. And if you're going to be able to have a smooth melodic effect, then it all has to be working together. And if it isn't, you get sort of, you get noise. So what that says is that our brain is not working in concert. Most especially what that says, since the split is with the verbal side so low, is that the area of brain that subserves language is the area that is not working up to par. And since we learn and our whole life is conducted by language, then the very mechanism by which we learn and live and function both internally in terms of our self-talk as well as externally with the world is impaired in Ms. Wuornos. Again, can she read? Yes. Can she understand what she reads? Yes. Can she speak? Yes. Though her expressive abilities are far below her receptive abilities, further than most of us. All of us have our expressive abilities are a little bit lower than receptive. In other words, we understand more than we can say, but with her, it's greater than average. And it is certainly a split that is, if you will, pathognomonic. In other words, it's in and of itself. That split alone, if nothing else were operating, that split alone would tell you there's something wrong with the brain. By the same token, the kind of cortical dysfunction that she has is not, I'm not saying that there's anything structurally wrong with her brain. I want to get that real clear. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the structure of her brain. In other words, if she were to have an EEG or a CAT scan or an MRI, she would show up fine. Everything is structurally intact, but it's not functioning right. It's as if you had, with your car, if your car were, you had all the parts to your motor there and everything is okay and it's complete, but you have sand in the gas line, let's say. Then you go to drive your car, it's going to sputter, it's going to maybe cut out on you, it may not start. You drive it a little ways and it'll stop and start and sputter. So it is that way with Ms. Wuornos' brain. It's structurally complete, as your car would be, your motor would be structurally complete, all the parts there, but it's not functioning right. And it's not functioning right because the various parts of the brain are not functioning in concert.
This problem...
It's a complicated thing, and I don't know if I'm putting it...
The cortical dysfunction problem that you're talking about, is that a physical problem?
It's a physical problem.
Or is that a matter of choice?
Oh, no, it's not a matter of choice. Nobody has any control over how their brain functions.
And the borderline personality disorder, is that a matter of choice? Is that something that a 6-year-old wakes up and says, I want to be this way?
No. Not only do we not have choices in terms of these sorts of things, but if we had choices, believe me, that's not something someone would wish to choose.
Why?
Because the individual is a very unhappy, I guess, discontented individual who cannot cope with the world, cannot figure out how to respond adaptively in the world to get their needs met. And it's like they go through life figuring out that they sort of have some sense that other people out there are doing it okay and they're not. But it's like they can't figure out how to do it okay, how to get their needs met in a way that is functional and adaptive and works. So it's like they can't get through the world in a way that works.
A person like Ms. Wuornos, is she mature?
No.
In what sense is she not mature?
No. Ms. Wuornos is probably one of the most primitive people I've seen outside of an institution. By that I mean that she functions at the level of very basic. By basic, I mean small child needs. We're talking about food and shelter and clothing and an attempt at some sense of security, an attempt at some sense of okayness and contentment that most people have figured out how to do and gotten beyond that so that they're more into things like making a living and contributing and mature interpersonal relationships. I mean, those are the things we begin to think about in adolescence. We're no longer at the level of basic trust and security needs. Those are things that we provide for infants and small children. That's the level at which Ms. Wuornos operates that. Her whole lifestyle.
Did you talk to her about her stopping taking drugs?
Yes.
Did she give you any time period for that?
She said that about the age of 17.
Did she tell you anything about her drinking?
Yeah, that she stopped that when she was arrested.
Arrested on this case?
Yes.
Keep going, I'm sorry.
Her whole lifestyle is one of constantly being in a state of sort of living on the edge. It's a state of potential danger. It's a state of never being at the point of choosing good food, a good place to live, adequate rest, things that would be nourishing even just to her body, never mind her mind or her psyche or psychological life. It's at that level of always living right at the edge of getting physical needs met. When I first saw Ms. Wuornos, let me put it this way. Ms. Wuornos today, though she is about 35, 40 pounds lighter, has lost about 35, 40 pounds from when I saw her the first time, looks immeasurably healthier in terms of her skin, her eyes, her hair, everything in terms of health. Looks immeasurably healthier right now than when I saw her a year ago, which was in February after she'd been arrested in January. At that point, there was that look of deprivation, of just somebody who's living a very disorganized life on the streets.
You indicated that these people have feelings of abandonment. People with borderline personality disorders. What is that? What sense do you have of that in Ms. Wuornos' case?
Well, she certainly was abandoned by both parents, and then, of course, raised by grandparents. There was given the verbal statements by her grandfather, there certainly is, that's not a person who's there for her emotionally. Although Ms. Wuornos states that her grandmother was this angelic individual, the very fact that she was afraid to tell anybody that she was pregnant for 6 months indicates to me that she didn't have a good, trusting, secure relationship with her caretakers. So we have no one that is there for her as a child. Otherwise, there would have been a sense of trust and security.
Is her judgment that of a normal individual?
No, she shows very poor judgment.
Is her judgment impaired?
Yes.
How about her insight? Did she have the insight of a normal adult?
No.
Is her insight impaired?
Yes. To ask Ms. Wuornos to reflect for a moment, sit and reflect about the situation you're in. How did you get here? How do you think this happened? No idea. No clues. There's a lot of externalization, which is typical for borderlines. Everybody out here is responsible. There's no sense of themselves as the actor. They're always the reactor, and they're always reacting to everything that everybody else did. But they're never the ones, from their perception now, they're never the ones that are in control, making the decisions, acting, and therefore responsible. And therefore, when you ask them to reflect upon that, there's a total lack of insight, because they cannot put together, because I did A, I got to B. They can't do that.
Is that a
Mr.
function
Hope,
of the...
I need to change my phone. Thank you.
Is that a function of the makeup, the psyche, the dysfunction in the brain of folks with cortical dysfunction, such as Ms. Wuornos and borderline
Well-
personality disorder, or is that a matter of choice?
No, it's not a matter of choice.
She doesn't choose to see the world the way she does.
Objection, Your Honor, leading, also object.
Withdraw.
Question withdrawn.
How does she choose to see the world? Does she choose to see the world in any way?
Yeah, I don't, do any of us choose to see the world? We simply do. We don't have a choice about seeing the world. Now, how we see it, Ms. Wuornos sees it as very typical, again, of borderline personalities. It's malevolent, it's persecutory. She's a victim. Her paranoia is frequently sky high. It's an angry, unpleasant, out to get her place. And that's partly what I meant by borderlines being extremely unhappy people. If we can sort of stop and think what it would be like for any of us to see the world as malevolent, as persecutory, as victimizing us, and that we are totally incompetent to deal with that. We may strike out at it periodically, but we're incompetent to deal with it. That's an extremely unpleasant place to be in day after day.
You talked a little bit about her dysfunctional family and some of the testing that was done for her in her schooling years.
Yes.
Do you recall a report of April 13th and 16th, 1970 in Ms. Wuornos' case? A school report?
Yes.
Do you recall whether that report reflected information such as what you're telling us today?
Yes, it did. There was the split. There was there were several things. Seeing herself as uncomfortable in her role, in other words, in the female role. There was the extreme guilt, extreme well, I think they characterized it as a very harsh superego, or I forget exactly how they put it. But it engendered a great deal of guilt in her and concerns for family, concerns for how her behavior affected other people.
Did it speak to her adjustment?
That had been going downhill since the beginning of junior high school.
You also described Ms. Wuornos as labile.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That's that their emotions are on a roller coaster. Very, very intense. Oftentimes sort of overwhelming them with their intensity. But it's the individual who in 5 to 10 minutes can cry and laugh and be angry and be happy and be sad and be all those things. I have not seen Ms. Wuornos since she's been here in the courtroom. During the times that I have been with her, I have watched her do this. I have watched her laugh and cry almost simultaneously, that rapidly, and go back and forth. And one can do that. You can, if you want to find out how fast it happens, you can stimulate that. You can make that happen. But it is in response to the external world. They don't have that core constancy that most of us have. So they're constantly, what I said a minute ago, they're reacting. They're not acting. They're reacting. Always reacting to the external world. Borderlines lack a core constancy that most of us have in terms of who we are, what we're all about. Most of us have that sense of ourselves, which borderlines don't have. A lot of character disorders don't have it, or personality disorders don't have it, but in particular borderlines don't.
Does she have cognitive impairments?
Yes.
What are cognitive impairments?
That's what I meant by language, by the split in the
Section asked and answered.
Overall,
split in the IQ test. She also, her memory function is variable, as one would expect with this kind of split. And that is things that are nonverbal. She remembers quite well. By that I mean geometric designs, faces, not as good, but okay, borderline. Borderline meant differently than borderline personality. Borderline score. But the things like geometric designs, she remembers certainly adequately. Events, what's called episodic memory, in other words, episodes, she can remember. But semantic memory, that is memory that relies on language and on concepts and manipulating words, I think her score was in the 23 percentile. And that's taking into account her age, which is not an issue here since she's 35, but her education, since that's 9th grade. It's matched against other people who are 35 and only have a 9th grade education, and she scores in the 23 percentile. That's obviously quite low. As compared, for instance, to her nonverbal memory for things like geometric designs, which is in the 61 or 64 percentile, somewhere around that area.
You had the opportunity to evaluate Ms. Wuornos' mental health functioning at the time of the Mallory test, did you not?
Yes.
And were you able to formulate any opinions in that regard?
In terms of her mental health functioning.
At the time of the Mallory test? Let me put it this way. Did she suffer from a borderline personality disorder at the time she was with Mr. Mallory?
Yes.
Did she suffer from cortical dysfunction at the time she was with Mr.
Your
Mallory?
Honor, can we allow the witness to testify in the objection meeting?
objection overruled. Go ahead.
Yes. Those are things that are constant from early childhood, basically until she dies. I mean, those are not things that are going to be changed. We don't know any way to change them at this point.
At the time that she was with Mr. Mallory, was her capacity to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law substantially impaired?
In my clinical opinion, it was.
Why do you say that?
I have to go back to Ms. Wuornos' account. In my clinical opinion, Ms. Wuornos saw herself, correctly or incorrectly, saw herself as threatened, saw herself as in severe, imminent danger. Now, whether that was accurate, I don't know. Whether that was a distortion of what was going on at that moment, I don't know. But in my clinical opinion, that is how she saw it. That would be compatible with the personality dysfunction, with her cortical dysfunction, personality disorder, with the cortical dysfunction, and with her account, which I have now heard 4 or 5 times, and which has been consistent all but one of those times, which has been consistent in its essentials. Because of that, because of all of those things put together, in my clinical opinion, she was not capable of conforming her conduct to the requirements of the law.
Could she distinguish right from wrong at the time?
Well, yeah, that's part of that. That gets to be a very complex question. Can she distinguish right from wrong?
Your Honor,
If you
I'm
were,
gonna check. Judge. Sir. May we approach?
Go ahead.
You talked about her substantially impaired capacity to conform her conduct to the requirements of law. Even with that capacity, could she distinguish right from wrong with that?
I've got to qualify them. If you took Ms. Wuornos out of that situation and simply asked her in a moment of calmness or sitting on the beach, is it wrong to take somebody's life? She would tell you yes. At that moment, feeling threatened, the question of whether that was right or wrong becomes irrelevant, as it would with any one of us. It becomes irrelevant at the moment at which we're confronted with what, in my clinical opinion, Ms. Wuornos believed was a life-threatening situation. At that point, we don't stop, put everything on freeze hold, and try and figure out whether what we're about to do is legal, illegal, anything else. We simply react. She is going to react more quickly, with less thought than the average individual, given her impairments anyway. And if she's in a situation which she believes she is threatened, then she's going to react instantaneously. And the question of whether it's right or wrong isn't relevant. It's not whether or not she would decide it's right or wrong. It's that it's no longer relevant.
Was her capacity to appreciate the criminality of her conduct substantially impaired at the time she was with Mr. Mallory?
In my clinical opinion, it is. Again, Ms. Wuornos does not see that her behavior was anything other than that she was defending herself. The idea that in some fashion there is responsibility on her part, or in some part for that, is not something that Ms. Wuornos can appreciate. She will say, I had no choice to be out there. That's what I do. This is the way I earn a living. I had to pay the bills. I had rent. I had electricity. I had food to pay. I had obligations the same as all of us have. This is what I do to pay those bills. Therefore, this is what I was doing. This individual threatened me, and I acted.
She had the gun.
Yes.
She went into his car.
Yes.
She drank some alcohol with him.
Yes.
They pulled over.
Yes,
She killed him,
yes,
and she took his stuff.
yes, she did.
And nevertheless, you're telling us her capacity was substantially impaired.
In my clinical opinion, given everything that makes up Ms. Wuornos at that moment and today, yes.
How do you square those actions with her impairment?
First of all, I would say that the very fact that, given her lifestyle, shows poor judgment. It shows an inability to cope adequately in the world and with the world. It shows impulsivity. It shows very poor skills. So, just given the fact that she's out on the road hitchhiking and making her way in the world as a prostitute. Secondly, she's now in this situation, and as she perceives this individual, they are harming her, hurting her physically, and threatening to hurt her worse in a few minutes or in a little while. And she becomes very, very frightened. And then when she has the moment to free herself or get herself physically free, sees no other way but to act in the manner in which she did, with different psychodynamics, with an intact brain that could operate differently, does operate differently, does not interact with her personality disorder. Might she have figured out a different way to get out of that situation, given that she was in it? Probably. But given her dynamics and given her history and given her view of the world and given her cortical dysfunction, in my clinical opinion, that was the only way that Ms. Wuornos perceived of getting out of the situation, of saving herself, in essence.
Had she had weapons on occasions prior to the killing of Mr. Mallory in her life?
Yes.
Had she ever shot anyone prior to being with Mr. Mallory,
Herself,
other than herself?
not to my knowledge.
Have you been able to formulate an opinion as to whether the emotional difficulties and disturbances we've been talking about affected Ms. Wuornos when she was with Mr. Mallory?
In my clinical opinion, they did.
At the time she was with Mr. Mallory, did she suffer from an extreme mental or emotional disturbance?
In my clinical opinion, she did then and does now.
The perceptions that you're talking about that Ms. Wuornos has, when formulating your opinion as to those perceptions, does it matter if Mr. Mallory did any of the things Ms. Wuornos said she did, that he did?
It matters to the extent that if he did none of them, and she is so firmly entrenched in her belief that he did, then my clinical diagnosis would change, and I would say we're dealing with a psychotic individual. Now, what generally occurs with folks like this is that there is some truth. May not be all. What truth there is gets distorted, but there is truth. And then their perceptions of that as it interacts with their dynamics and their ability to keep using the word self-talk, to work things through in their head, as we all do, as we cognitively solve a problem and reach a solution. Her impairment in that area and her psychodynamics would make those distortions greater. So in that sense, yeah, it's important in the sense that if none of that happened, then I think we're dealing with somebody who's psychotic. And I don't think, my clinical perception of Ms. Wuornos is she's not psychotic.
What is psychotic? Just define that term for us.
Basically out of touch with reality. Someone who lives in a world that is different from the consensually valid world that most of us would agree upon and live in most of the time.
What if Mr. Mallory did nothing and she's just lying about it?
That is inconsistent with the test material and what we know about people who suffer from these impairments. I have observed the videotape. I have heard Ms. Wuornos tell me about these incidents in March. I found both of those times to be somewhat confusing. I found it very difficult to follow her in March. I even asked her to draw me diagrams, and when she got through the diagrams, I couldn't follow them either. I found her thinking very loose, very non-sequential. I just had a very difficult time trying to interview her in March, and that's one of the reasons that I decided to let her sort of dry out, and I would come back and try it again in a few months. I did that, and in the meantime, I had access to some materials that she had written for her attorney. I read those, and Ms. Wuornos did not know that I had read them. I went and interviewed her, and she gave me an entirely different story, but a story that matched the account she had given to her attorney back in June. This was now in December. I have read 2 other accounts that she gave in January, and they essentially match. I'm not saying that it's verbatim. It's not. If it were verbatim, I'd be very concerned about it. But in essence, what she's saying is the same. There are details that are the same. Maybe minor rearrangements of them, but there are details that are the same. In my clinical judgment, if Ms. Wuornos did not believe that it happened, I'm not saying whether it happened or didn't happen, but if she did not believe that it happened, she could not, with her memory impairment, give the same story 6 months later and then another month after that. And I did not hear what she said in court the other day, so I don't know what she said.
And you've reviewed accounts that she's given to other doctors, have you not?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I reviewed 2 others that she gave in January, both of those in January, plus her accounts to me in December and January, and the account that she had given earlier in June, which she did not know that I had access, but I had read.
Irrespective of her view of Mr. Mallory and the specific details, do all of the accounts have a common theme that she perceived herself to be threatened?
Yes, and that includes back in March and in February when I first saw her, and at least my perceptions of the taped confession, all of those times, that's consistent that she is saying, I acted in self-defense.
While Ms. Wuornos was hitchhiking, making her living as a prostitute, had she been abused on the road?
Yes, according to her, she had. Now, keep in mind, there are 2 separate times she made her primary living as a prostitute. One was from the ages of 15 to 20. During that time, she spoke of having been gang raped when she was either 17 or 18. Stated that she had willingly gone to a party, had willingly ingested some alcohol, but not willingly been tied to bed and raped. She had then not from the ages of 20 to 28, she did other kinds of work and did not work primarily as a prostitute, though she prostituted some of the time. From 28 until she was arrested, she was primarily a prostitute. During that time, she related basically 5 instances which she terms rape. 2 of them are with individuals that did not have a weapon, did not threaten her in any way, did not hurt her in any way, according to what she told me. She terms it rape because, and this took me a while to figure out with Ms. Wuornos, when I first asked her to define rape, one of the ways that she defined it was that somebody hurts or does something against your will or injures you in some way. The other thing is that they have sex and don't pay you. Now, what I later realized was that Ms. Wuornos has a consistent way of functioning with her clients, and that is that they must pay her first. So if she's saying they had sex without paying me, it's because they didn't pay her. She refused and said, I'm not going to have sex with you. And they insisted and in some way forced her to anyway. So the having sex without paying means that it was against her will, because the fact they hadn't paid her, she was saying, no, I won't do this. These two individuals, she said, she just got angry and verbalized, yelled at them in some abusive manner, verbally abusive manner, but didn't do anything. Said she had a gun with her, but did not use it because they had not hurt her in any way. She sort of felt sorry for them, and she just was verbally abusive and let them go on their way. The other 3 times she related to me twice that, and according to the notes is related to other people, that she had in one case, I think it was tear gas, in one case mace, and in one case something else, something equivalent to that. In each of those cases that was taken away from her and in essence used against her in some way, and one time a shotgun was held out on her. The other times the individuals had a weapon, but I can't remember, I'm sorry, what that was. I'd have to look at my notes. But at any rate, that she was forced to have sex, and that she was very frightened and begged for her life. She related that those 2 instances that occurred in the late 80s, I think 88 and 89, and then those 3 instances where she was scared and begging for her life, and the other 2 instances that occurred within the 6 months before Mr. Mallory.
Ms. Wuornos' perceptions of the world and people around her, are those a product of the dysfunctions and impairments you've been speaking about?
And her early life, everything. I mean, we are a product of every day that's gone before us, and, you know, our psychodynamics and our cognitive abilities to cope. So all of those.
You talked about some of the projective tests that you gave Ms. Wuornos.
Yes.
I'm going to show something to opposing counsel, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Show it to the doctor after. Doctor, let me show you a document that's been marked as Defense Exhibit C for identification, and let me ask you to just take a look at that and tell us what that is.
That is the last picture that Ms. Wuornos drew during the time that I asked. It's a group of pictures called, they're projected drawings. I asked a person to draw a house, a tree, a person of the opposite sex. Kinetic family drawing, meaning draw me a picture of what was typical for you in your home when you were growing up. Your most unpleasant concept, your most pleasant concept, and then anything you like. This is what she drew when we got to anything you like.
And she drew that as part of your testing?
Yes.
That was in response to just draw whatever you want to draw?
Whatever you like, yes.
The time it published, move the exhibit into evidence and publish
Objection,
it.
Your Honor, it's irrelevant. Because when you take a look at it, you'll see that there is no relevance to it, other than it was try to court sympathy.
Just a moment that for identification.
We're moving it at this time, Your Honor. Did you rely on those projective test results in formulating your opinion, Doctor?
Yeah.
Yeah, they received and marked it out with that proper number of offenses.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I may publish the item to your judgment. While the jury is looking at the item, what did the projective test tell you about Ms. Wuornos?
They told me that I was dealing with an individual who was not psychotic, who wasn't in touch with reality.
I'm sorry, who was?
was not psychotic, who was in touch with reality, who deals at the level of very primitive basic needs, who has a potential for better interpersonal relationships, but whose perceptions of people are very distantiated. By that I mean, she wants to distance people away. They're in the forms of angels, wizards, ghosts. In other words, they're distantiated. They're not human people. Most of which are malevolent. That her affect is overwhelms her cognition oftentimes. By that I mean that when she gets emotionally aroused, her ability to make good judgments goes out the window. That she sees the world as extremely conflictual, and again, malevolent, with things that, again, evil spirits, ghosts, things that are beyond our face-to-face control, beyond our ability to interact with in a predictable manner. Paranoid, that is, that people are out to get her, if you will. A lot of depression, a lot of unmet affectional needs for affection, and just basic closeness, basic human warmth, lacking. Angry, some what we would call bizarre thinking. That's more in terms of distortions of perceptions, not to the point of being psychotic, but that her perceptions do get distorted. And a person who's angry, distrustful, suspicious of the world.
Was the result of the projective testing consistent with the borderline personality disorder and the cortical dysfunction from which Ms. Wuornos suffered and has suffered from the time she was a child?
The projective testing or procedures, assessment, does not, in general, give us a sense of the cortical dysfunction. It's not its purpose, and so that's not what we get. In terms of the borderline functioning, yes. And her clinical presentation is that. And by that, I'm saying that before I even scored any of the material, I simply had the first interaction I had with Ms. Wuornos and walked out of the detention facility. My sense was that Ms. Wuornos was a borderline personality. I guess the testing buttressed the clinical presentation.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Please report the wire. Dr. McMahon, would you tell us in your expert opinion whether or not the defendant is legally insane?
My clinical opinion, she is not.
Tell us in your clinical opinion whether or not the defendant knows the difference between right and wrong.
In my clinical opinion, in most instances, yes. In times of extreme affective disorganization, I don't think it's something that she would be maybe able to work through cognitively, but in general. Does she know the difference between right and wrong? She knows the difference between right and wrong as a general.
She understands the difference between right and wrong, the nature and the consequences of her actions. Isn't that true?
In my clinical opinion, she does. Yes.
Does not meet the legal definition of insanity.
In my clinical opinion, she does not.
She did not meet the legal definition of insanity on the morning of December the 1st, 1989. Is that not true?
I'm sorry, the date is, are you saying that Mr. Mallory
was shown?
In my clinical opinion, she did not meet, they would not have met the conditions of the requirements of the McNaught rule.
So, under the law of the state of Florida, as you understand it, she was legally sane at that time.
In my clinical opinion, she was, yes, sir.
And she knew when she shot Richard Mallory over and over and over again that what she was doing was wrong, legally.
At that moment, I do not think that that was a relevant or even a consideration for her.
So then you say that Lee Wuornos is not responsible for her actions on that morning.
No, I'm not saying she's not responsible.
Well, Doctor,
Mr. Moore,
for
I
you-
think she's responsible.
For you to arrive at that conclusion, you have to believe what Lee Wuornos tells you happened.
That's correct.
And you're aware that this jury has already rejected Lee Wuornos' account of that.
That's correct.
Now, you have...
That's not Lee Wuornos' perception. Okay?
Well,
I understand
truth has nothing to do with
found
it,
her.
is that right?
Your Honor, if the witness can answer.
Sorry, I won't interrupt. The truth of what really happened out there doesn't matter if your diagnosis doesn't.
As I've explained before,
No, ma'am. Does it? Yes or
If the
no?
witness can answer, Your Honor.
Calls for a yes or no, Your Honor. I ask that you do.
it matters insofar as if it is at great variance with Ms. Wuornos' perceptions, then we're dealing with a psychotic individual. If it is not at great variance, then no, it doesn't matter in the sense that what is determinative of each of our behaviors is our perceptions. And
So
if
you
her
believe that-
perception is in accord with reality, then I have to say she's sane.
So she was sane. She knew the difference between right and wrong on that morning. You're not saying she was insane.
I'm not
Has
saying,
been answered, Your Honor.
And she understood the nature and the consequences of her actions then and now. Is that not true?
in my clinical opinion, she did and does,
And she did before that date.
as far as I know.
Now, the fact that someone has a borderline personality dysfunction doesn't make them a killer, does it?
Does that make them a killer? Not in and of itself.
According to Lee Wuornos' account, the defendant's account to you of her life, she claimed never to have killed anyone before. Is that not true?
That's true.
And you say that she had this borderline personality dysfunction at the age of 15.
Yes,
So this cortical dysfunction, which you described she had at 15,
yes,
and this borderline personality dysfunction, which she had at the age of 15,
Yes.
is not something that drove her to kill people at the age of 15, according to her account.
Did that drive her to kill someone at the age of 15?
Would someone
Not as
stop-
far as I know.
So someone then suffering with this mental dysfunction, as you described, would not be driven to kill because they suffered from that specific dysfunction, as you
Wait,
described.
wait a minute. That's different than what you just said.
Well, doctor, my question is...
Your Honor, if the witness can answer.
She's not answering my question.
Objection overruled if there was one.
Doctor, Lee Wuornos told you she'd never killed anyone before, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's your testimony to this jury that Lee Wuornos suffered from the same condition when she was 15 years of age as she suffers today. Isn't that correct?
She's suffering from that right now. She's not killing anyone right this minute.
Because
She
she's
will suffer
incarcerated,
for
Doc.
it. She will suffer from that condition as long as she lives.
So
in that kind of opinion.
there's really no hope of ever helping Lee Wuornos as far as rehabilitation. She'll have this the rest of her life.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope. Objection,
Overruled.
beyond the,
Answer.
Isn't that true, doctor?
beyond the scope of the sentencing proceeding, Your Honor.
The objection overruled.
Isn't that true, doctor, that she's had it, she has it now, and she'll always have it?
That's not the question you just asked me. The question you just asked me is that she could not never be helped. Two different things. She will always be a borderline personality. Is there a potential that she could ever be helped to live more adaptively? There's a potential. It's low. It's not, they're not good prognostically. They're not real good for therapeutic, not good, what's the word? The prognosis is not real good therapeutically for borderline personalities. They're very, very difficult to deal with. And with somebody as primitive as Lee, it'd be very difficult. Is it possible? It's possible.
Okay, in the possible, it's possible for me to be the next man on the moon, but it's not probable, is it?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Doctor answered that.
Judge, I'd ask that the court direct the witness whether to answer, not
All right,
counsel.
I will overrule the objection.
Isn't that what we're talking about here, doctor? In the real world, we have no real possibility of her ever changing because what you say is her borderline personality dysfunction and cortical dysfunction.
No, I am not saying that there's no real possibility of her changing in the real world. There is. Okay? The probability is low. Is there a possibility? Yes. Is there a probability? Yes. It would take somebody who can deal with her intensively?
24 hours a day,
No.
7 days a week.
No. 3 times a week? Yes, she would meet 3 times a week with somebody who is very good at dealing with borderlines.
So in other words, someone that would sit down and counsel with her, would be able to explain to her the improprieties of her ways, and she'd be able to then simply turn a new leaf. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I wish therapy were that simple.
So we're talking about the real world then. She would not be able to turn that leaf.
No, you keep asking the same question over again. That's not
Keep
what
answering
I'm
me different ways,
saying.
doctor.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is possible, there's a low probability.
Doesn't mean, just ask questions, don't argue with it.
Yes, sir. Every account that you have of Lee Wuornos' family background is primarily from her, is it not? When you talk about the rape, you say that you read an account by her sister.
Yes,
But that sister's account is based upon what Lee Wuornos told her about the rape, isn't it?
I have no idea where her sister got it.
Okay, so you don't know whether or not that's a self-reporting Lee Wuornos telling her that I was raped.
No, I don't know that. All I know is that her sister said she was raped at an early age.
You don't know whether that's accurate or not, do you?
No, I wasn't there.
But you accept that as true, do you not? Because Lee Wuornos told you it was true.
Well, I don't have any reason not to accept it, let's put it that way.
Well, doctor, you don't know whether it's true or not, do you?
In the sense of was I there? No, I don't know that.
And you don't know whether or not Lee Wuornos had lied to his sister when she claimed that she had been raped.
If that's how the only way her sister knew it, then no, I don't know that.
And you don't know whether 6 months after she had found herself to be pregnant, when she was at her home and she had to explain a pregnancy, it was easier for her to lie about being raped than it was Barry Brody, her sister, and she had Barry Wuornos, her sister. When I say sisters, her aunts and uncles, actually.
Right.
So there was a family unit there, wasn't there?
Yes,
And there was interaction
Yes.
between that family unit.
of some type, yes.
And
And
isn't
then
it-
she was fortunate to have the family unit.
And isn't it a fact that the defendant told you that her grandfather, the most hideous thing he ever did to her, was try to keep her from being truant and from running away, and he would ground her? And on occasion, strike her with a belt to stop her from running away and being truant?
No,
Well, doctor, isn't it, do we need to go through your notes?
that's fine. The worst thing that he ever did, according to her, was to strike her in the face with a belt buckle.
And didn't she tell you that was an accident because she had run away from home and she was truant from school, and as he was trying to discipline her, the belt buckle accidentally hit her? Please refer to your notes, doctor, of your interviews.
Do you know which day, right offhand? Okay.
Try March the 8th, doctor.
March 8th?
Please, sir. First page. Under discipline. Accidentally struck once in the face with a ball. We have a 1X by.
Right,
On one occasion, in 15 years of her living at home with her grandfather.
right. Well,
Isn't
yeah.
that what you say, doctor?
Yes,
Isn't that what the defendant related to you?
at that time, yes.
Well, did she relate other things to you that you're different from that at a later time?
I think I asked her to go in, at some point, I asked her to go into that a little bit more in
And she changed her
detail.
story, did she not?
I don't know that she changed her story.
Well, with time, didn't
No.
she give you a different story, a different account
On January 8th,
of this year?
yes,
Her story became more magnified, didn't it, as to the discipline?
Your Honor, if the witness could
I'm
be allowed to
sorry.
answer something.
Your Honor, I didn't,
Dr. Fee, feel free to refresh her recollection.
I asked her with regard to the physical discipline. She said her father would give her a licking and that he used a belt, but only on the butt or the legs and to the point of bruising. That's all. Said that she had fought with him and that's when he struck her on the back and in the face with a belt buckle. He told that her father told everybody he, quote, hated my guts, unquote. I asked her why, and she said she didn't know, but perhaps because she was Diane's daughter. Now, that's compatible with the earlier things that she said in the interview that you were quoting.
This is all her self-reporting to you, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't it a fact that primarily everything that Lee Wuornos you accepted as fact for your family history?
If it coincided with other things that,
No, doctor. My
That
question
other
is, did
things
you
that-
not accept what she told
Your
you?
Honor, objection, please, if the witness can answer.
Good question, sir.
I'd ask that you be responsible, Your Honor.
Well, let her answer the question, the argument, or it's that, but
Those things that coincided with other accounts.
So in other words, you read the statements of Lori Grody and Barry Wuornos.
Yes.
And isn't it a fact that in both Lori Grody's statements and Barry Wuornos' statements, they indicate that her father rarely disciplined Aileen Wuornos?
Okay. Barry states that, and
Doctor,
at the same time
Judge, I
states
asked
he
the
wasn't
witness to
home.
respond.
she's funny, but she knows how, and you get that we about.
That he had left when she was 9, 10, so that he wasn't even there.
Doctor, isn't it a fact that Barry Wuornos said that his father disciplined her minimally as compared to the other children?
The same as the other children, I think is what he said. That she and Keith were brought into the home, and the question was, were they treated any differently? And I think Barry said, no, they weren't.
And Barry Wuornos said that his father did not mistreat him.
Did not mistreat him?
That's correct.
I think that's correct, that he
Did not mistreat the other children.
That was his perception.
And then Mr. Barry Wuornos, the uncle, raised as the brother of this defendant, also indicate that when his father drank, he sat in an easy chair and he would fall asleep and not bother the children.
Yeah, that was his testimony, and that was his statement, statement.
And as a fact, when you read Lori Grody's statement of their family history, she verified the same account that Barry Wuornos gave, did she not? Wasn't that significantly different than what Aileen Wuornos claimed to be her family background?
As well as others, yes.
So there were many accounts that Aileen Wuornos gave you about what was happening in her family life as she grew up that was different than what Lori Grody and Barry Wuornos said was happening in that family.
Different than theirs and compatible with some others.
The reports by Ms. Wuornos to you, these are all self-reports, are they not? In other words, you're talking to her and she talks to you.
Right.
When you were first introduced to her, you were told by her defense attorney, and she was told in your presence that you were there as a confidential expert, were you not?
Objection, Your Honor, to any discussion involving counsel.
Goes to the perception of the defendant as to why she was giving this material, the bias of this witness also.
Withdraw the last one.
Counsel's objection.
Withdraw the last one, Judge. Let that question be answered. Withdraw. Just the area we reject.
Would you repeat the question?
But what was your understanding of your reasons for being there to interview Ms. Wuornos?
To evaluate her with regard to her mental status at the time of this offense, her competency to stand trial, and whatever her mental condition was at the time.
And in your presence, wasn't she told that you were there to help her?
To help her?
Yes.
Not that I recall.
Did you tell her that you were there as a confidential expert and nothing that she said to you could be used unless she chose and her defense attorneys chose to allow it to be heard?
No, that is not what I told her.
What did you tell her?
I told her that my clinical opinion was not a matter of confidentiality, that the facts of the case would be a matter of confidentiality unless they were given by some other means, and that my report would go to her attorney, and if her attorney felt that in some way it would be beneficial to her legal situation, I was then subpoenable by the state attorney's office.
Then and only then, if your report was favorable to the defendant, would it be made known?
Could help the defendant in some fashion, yes.
And your intention is to help the defendant, is it not?
No, my intention is to render an as thorough an evaluation as I possibly can, to find out as much as I possibly can about this individual, and to arrive at the conclusions, answer the questions I'm asked to answer as thoroughly and completely as I possibly can. That's my intention.
In the first interview that you had with this defendant, she didn't tell you anything about being raped by anyone, did she?
No, I didn't ask anything.
She didn't tell you, though, did she?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I didn't take any notes. All I did was test them.
You don't recall whether or not Ms. Wuornos, the first time you met her, was claiming that she'd been raped by Richard Mallory or another man?
I don't recall.
And then on March the 8th, when you met her the second time, she never made any claims that Richard Mallory raped her, did she?
No, she did not.
It wasn't until almost 9-10 months later, at your next interview, where that story now was that Richard Mallory had raped her?
No. In June, she had written out some material for her
I
attorney.
asked your next interview, when you met her next.
Oh, my interview, yes, December.
So we have a space of what, from March the 8th, starting in February to March the 8th, and then to December. So it took the defendant from your first interview in February until December of that year to recount to you that she had been raped by Richard Mallory.
I didn't see her between those, so yes.
Well, you had the opportunity to see her if you chose to do so, didn't you?
That's my point. I didn't see her, so she didn't have the opportunity to tell me any differently. She did tell her attorney differently in June.
Doctor,
Maybe before that.
if you
I
had
don't know.
chosen to interview her, you could have, could you not, over the
Of
space
course.
of a year?
Of course. But
And
you're
so-
saying it took her that long to tell me, only because I wasn't present. She
Doctor.
couldn't tell me if I hadn't been present.
Isn't it true that in the first 2 interviews, she never told you anything about being raped?
That's true.
In fact, her story expanded with time, did it not, as to what had happened to her?
You mean between when I first saw her and all the rest of the times?
Yes, ma'am?
Yes.
Doctor, in your preparation for your testimony, what other witnesses did you speak with, other than the defendant?
Talked very briefly by phone with a cousin, some distant cousin, who was on his way from someplace, Miami to Michigan, and talked with a gentleman who said that he had picked Ms. Wuornos up in May of 1990 and spent 6 days with her, 5 days with her.
Now, so you spoke with no other family members of Ms. Wuornos about her childhood and her family upbringing?
Other than the cousin.
Well, his cousin lived in the house with him?
Visited frequently, did not reside, but visited frequently. Apparently her grandfather was a favorite uncle.
Did you speak with Lori Grody?
No,
Did you try?
no,
Did you speak with Barry Wuornos?
no,
Did you try?
no,
Did you speak with Ty Moore, who had lived with the defendant for the past 4.5 years prior to her arrest?
no.
Did you try?
Didn't feel it was necessary.
It wouldn't be necessary to speak with someone that had lived with her day in and day out for 4.5 years before this offense?
I had 2 sworn statements and a lengthy deposition.
So you chose not to speak with her to confirm what was taken in the statements.
I didn't speak with her.
You chose not to. Is that a yes or no, Doctor?
At some point, I remember talking with the defense attorney about would she
That's
be
not my-
available. And
Doctor,
so when you
did
say
you-
chose
Your
not
Honor, if
to,
the witness can answer.
Judge, she's simply not being responsive.
All right, just let her answer.
I'm trying to think what the response was. Whether, at that time, I know she was not available, or I was told she was not available.
Doctor, did you ever
Yeah.
request of anyone in the state attorney's office to speak with Ty Moore?
No.
You could have done that if you chose to do so. couldn't you?
Your Honor, I object. That's improper.
They weren't going to argue with you. So you want to please just ask your question?
Doctor, the picture that you described for the jury of what the defendant was doing when she went hitchhiking and drinking and using drugs, that's all her self-representation of that account, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And then during that period of time, she had this personality dysfunction as you described it,
Yes.
but it didn't cause her to kill anyone as she described it.
I'm sorry?
It didn't cause her to kill anyone as she described it.
Not at that time, no.
Did she describe to you her criminal history?
Yes.
She described to you in that criminal history other acts of violence or theft?
Or what?
Or theft?
Yes. Theft.
Can I
Did you
have just,
consider her criminal history? I'm sorry. Court?
can I have just a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
Not to the borderline personality, no. Not to
Whether
my
she-
diagnosis.
Whether she committed offenses that dealt with crimes of honesty or dishonesty would have nothing to do with you.
No,
Whether or not she had stolen items from other individuals and used alias names, that have no relevance to you.
no. Not arriving at a diagnosis, no.
Isn't it a fact, doctor, that the defendant provided you with a history of manipulation and lies to people and everyone around her?
Manipulation, yes. Lies, no.
Because you believe her.
It's internally consistent, and it's consistent with other things, externally consistent.
Is that a yes or a no, doctor?
That's a yes for most of the time.
So you believed her when it suited you, and you disbelieved her when it didn't suit you?
No, I believed her when it was internally and externally consistent. I questioned her when it was not.
But you were looking inside her internally, and that somehow gave you some input as to whether you're telling the truth or not? You said it was internally and externally existent. I'm trying to understand what she means. Were you looking internally into her somehow? That gives you some basis?
There's internal consistency in the sense of to what someone is saying. It's either internally consistent, in other words, what they say from one time to the next time, from this hour to that hour, to the different ways I ask the questions, or it isn't, and it's externally consistent in terms of, well, it's also internally consistent with the diagnosis and their dynamics. It's externally consistent or not with test results, with other, like the cortical dysfunction, with their school records, that sort of thing.
Well, doctor, isn't it a fact you told the jury that you watched her confession tape?
Yes.
Some 3.5 hours.
Yes.
Now, during the course of listening to that tape, did you hear her make various statements to the law enforcement officers as to why she had killed each of these men?
Yes.
Did you hear her say that one guy had a weapon with him? He had a .45 caliber. It was dark. He didn't know where he put it. This is the weapon that I sold, and I don't know where he put it, but I didn't know he had a weapon. See, I had no idea he had a weapon. But when he started shitting me, that's when I grabbed my gun and started shooting. You remember that statement that she made?
Do I remember that she made that statement? No, I will take your word for it. I do not remember everything on 3.5 hours worth of tape. I will assume that you're reading it correctly.
Well, would you like to see a transcript?
No.
Did you consider that account varied or changed when you heard the account as to that individual?
Yes.
And isn't it a fact that when you heard the account from Ms. Wuornos, she had changed her story?
Yes.
In fact, on each and every occasion, as you asked her as to her reasons for killing Mr. Mallory or killing any of the other men, her stories changed, did they not?
Her reasons were always self-defense. And details changed, yes.
The details changed, whether she stole money or how much money she took. In the case of Mr. Mallory, didn't she tell you different amounts that she took?
She may have.
It was difficult for her to keep her stories together, was it not? From one date to another?
It's difficult for Ms. Wuornos to remember certain things from one time to another, very definitely.
Do you remember her talking to you about a Christian guy?
Yes.
Do you remember watching her in a statement describe to the police officers the killing of that Christian guy?
Objection, Your Honor. Any time that grounds beyond the scope of the sentence.
That's the same exact.
Doctor, would it be fair to say that as you viewed her videotaped confession, and as she described the events of that videotape to you, excuse me, those events that she described in the videotape, over and over again, her accounts of those incidences, those murders, changed?
Oh, even like on the tape, you mean?
No, I'm talking about between the tape and when you heard it. The first time.
Yes, it even changed on the tape.
In the case of Mr. Mallory, there was no indication of Mr. Mallory raping her, was there on tape?
No.
And in your first interview, there was no indication of Mr. Mallory raping her, was there? In February.
Not specifically, no. March, you mean?
Well, you met her first in February, and she made no accounts to you that she'd been raped by Richard Mallory.
I don't recall, okay, so I'm saying, I'm presuming not.
Well, you take extensive notes, don't you, Doc?
Yes, and as you know, there are no notes for that, for the February, because all I did was testing.
And in March, but she did not speak with you or say to you, I was raped.
I honestly don't know. I'm going to assume not, because she didn't say it in March.
And in March, she was not. She told you she had not been raped. She never made
No,
any
she
account.
didn't tell me she had not been. She did not tell me she had been. That's different.
Well, you told us that she has the ability to remember episodes.
Yes.
You think that a woman that has been anally raped and sodomized and vaginally attacked and brutalized to the extent that she claims to have been, but to you, would be able to forget that episode?
Would she be able to forget it? In terms of both her condition at the time she was arrested and for some period of time after that, I can see where she may not have related it, yes.
But eventually, she did come around to relating that to you, and that was in December of 1991.
Objection to the following question.
Isn't that true? That's the first account that you received from her.
From her, yes.
That was almost
Directly from her, yes.
9 or 10 months later.
Directly from her, yes.
Now, this defendant was capable of working, wasn't she? Well, she
of
was
what?
capable of working, capable of holding down a job. Is that what you're telling us?
She had held, unskilled jobs before that.
But she made
Not
choices.
long.
She made choices not to hold down those jobs, to go on to greener pastures, make more money as a prostitute.
That's assuming some sort of cognitive sitting back making a choice. In the sense that nobody had a 45 at her head when she did it, yes, she made a choice in the sense of what were her possible options as she perceived them to be, that's different. That may not be correct, but in terms of what she perceived, that's different.
Well, she had no mental dysfunction that prevented her from earning an honest living if she chose to do so. Isn't that true?
Well, she could probably hold down a certain kind of a job for longer than a few months, yes.
If she chose to do so.
Yes.
So she doesn't suffer any type of impairment that prevents her from earning an honest living.
Objection to the form of the question, Your Honor.
No. If you can.
No, she can work at unskilled jobs, yes. She could earn a living that way.
She can make more money as a prostitute. Isn't that what you told her?
Is that what she told me? She said it was good money. If I pinned her down, did she in fact make more money than she could probably at other jobs? No, not when she's always scrambling to get the rent.
So she was not making good money as a prostitute, was she? Is that what you're telling us she told you?
I'm saying that if you pin her down in terms of what she says she was making the X number of times a day, that doesn't jive with somebody who needed to make the rent or needed to go out so that they could pay the electric bill or whatever. Those two facts don't mesh.
That didn't jive what she was telling, how much money she was making, and yet at the same time telling you she didn't have money for rent.
Right, I'm saying those two didn't jive.
So she was telling you in one case something that did not mesh with the other. You're telling me a different story.
Well, yeah, well, except that the stories aren't the same, but I mean, if you pursue the two stories out, you're going to find that they don't coalesce.
Doctor, you said that Lee Wuornos is not psychotic, is that correct?
Correct.
She's not delusional?
Not that I'm aware of, and she denies them.
Isn't the fact that she has no organic brain dysfunction?
That's not a fact.
You're saying this cortical dysfunction is now an organic brain dysfunction?
Same thing.
There's no medical proof of any dysfunction, though, is there?
No, that's what I said earlier. There's no structural damage. That's different than saying a cortical dysfunction.
Isn't the fact that you did not seek to have a neurologist test her because you knew what the results would be, that there would be no medical finding to support your opinion?
Excuse me? I'm sorry. Say that again.
Isn't it true, doctor, you did not seek the help of a neurologist to do a CAT scan or an MRI or anything of a
They're
brain?
not nearly as sensitive as a neuropsychological functioning. Why would I do that?
Doctor, you didn't do it, did you?
No. No. All the studies indicate they're not nearly as sensitive.
You're
so
not a doctor.
I'm not going to do that.
Are you a medical doctor?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Saying if there's an objection.
Objection, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
So you're making a medical decision without consulting a neurologist as to the extent of any brain dysfunction that she has.
I'm making a neuropsychological decision, which is what I'm trained to do.
Well, your training has led you to testify in court, you say, some 25 times in death penalty cases?
Somewhere around there.
In each of those cases, those were situations where juries had already found someone to be guilty of first-degree murder, was it not?
You're saying, was I always testifying at the penalty phase?
When you testified at the penalty phase, had the individual already been found guilty of murder in first degree?
Obviously, if I was testifying at the penalty phase, and I'm saying, I don't recall whether they were all at the penalty phase, is all I'm saying.
But when you
But-
testified in the penalty
Phase, they would have already been found guilty, yes.
in those instances, you had testified on behalf of the defendant as to why the death penalty was not appropriate.
Objection, Your Honor. Form of the
No.
question and asked and answered.
Doctor, isn't it a fact that you personally are against the death penalty?
I professionally, as I stated to you before,
Yes, you told me you were personally and professionally against
Objection,
death
Your Honor.
no, I did not, sir.
penalty.
You asked me what my feelings were on the death penalty professionally, and I said, to me, it does not make much sense. That is different. You asked me my personal opinion, and I said, I guess that would be the same as my professional opinion. I don't see a difference.
So they would be the same?
Right? That it doesn't make any sense from a
Not what I asked
professional
you,
point
whether
of
you thought it
view.
made any sense, doctor. I asked you if your personal and professional opinion was that you were not in favor of the death penalty.
Not a matter of whether I'm in favor or not in favor. I can't answer that. It's something I have to deal with. From
You
a
don't know
professional
whether or
point
not
of-
you're in favor or against the death penalty, personally or professionally?
No, it's just something, it's reality. It is. It's something I deal with.
It's not a trick question, doctor. Are you or aren't you? No answer.
No answer.
Doctor, when Ms. Wuornos was describing to you the shooting, the murder of Gino Antonio, do you recall that?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the sentencing.
Say the objection.
Would it be fair to say that on each of the accounts that Ms. Wuornos told you, she claimed that she was acting in self-defense on each of the shootings that she was involved in?
Yes.
You familiar with the autopsy of Gino Antonio?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the sentencing.
Say the objection.
Did you consider in your diagnosis any of the relevant autopsies as to any individual, including Mr. Malley, and determining whether or not Aileen Wuornos was telling you the truth about what had occurred out there that night?
In my diagnosis, no, it's irrelevant.
The question's been answered, Your Honor.
So whether or not the physical facts substantiate what the defendant told you happened the night that she killed Richard Malley, that would have no effect upon your opinion.
There's no effect upon my diagnosis whatsoever. She's a borderline regardless of what occurred out there.
But you told us that the mere fact that someone is a borderline, as you phrase it, doesn't make them kill.
No, there are borderlines who don't kill. There are borderlines who do. There are people who kill who are not borderline. So there's not a one-to-one correlation between borderline or any other personality dysfunction and homicide.
So the fact that you tell us that Ms. Wuornos had this borderline personality the night that she murdered Richard Malley has no bearing on whether or not what really happened out there is what she told you.
That's not what I said at all.
Okay, you talk her perception.
No, I'm saying that certainly the fact that she is a borderline has a lot to do with her perceptions, and it has a lot to do with the way she's going to react given that situation out there. That situation out there does not have anything to do with her diagnosis, with reaching a conclusion about her diagnosis.
Well, the diagnosis, though, does not, of that personality, necessarily equate to someone going out and killing, does it?
Correct, it does not.
What is an antisocial personality, Doctor?
It is an individual who has all the 12 characteristics, three or four of the 12 characteristics before the age of 15, and plus the adult characteristics in the DSM-3R. They are primarily having to do with acting out against society, and also sort of one's view of that, not only the acting out, but the view of that.
Do you consider whether or not Ms. Wuornos would fit into the characterization of an antisocial personality?
I certainly entertained that as a rule-out diagnosis.
And did you find that to be the case?
I found it not to be the case.
So you ruled out antisocial personality?
In my clinical opinion, she is not antisocial personality, she is borderline personality.
Well, doctor, let me ask you, as you reviewed the records that were presented to you, may I assume that those records that were presented to you were given to you by defense counsel?
Yes,
You reviewed her school records.
yes.
Did her school records reveal that prior to the age of 15, she'd been truant many times?
No, did not. No, there was no mention of truancy whatsoever.
Did you read the accounts of Lori and Barry Wuornos as to whether or not she had run away from home or was truant from school?
Yes,
And did in fact Lori and Barry Wuornos recount incidents where she had been truant from school and also had run away?
I took the school records as to whether or not she'd been truant. As to whether or not she had run away, Ms. Wuornos had talked about running away. The issue was whether she had run away before or after the age of 15, and I think it's twice, and I think it says not excluding, avoiding physical or sexual abuse,
Well, doctor,
or any kind of abuse, I think it says.
didn't Ms. Wuornos tell you that no one in her family was sexually abusing her?
Yes,
You choose to believe that or you disbelieve that?
no, I believe that. Although even her cousin raised some issue, and certainly her mother raised an issue about that, but she denied it. So that's certainly up for question.
Well,
I do not assume that she's been abused, although the question has been seriously raised by two other people beside Ms. Wuornos.
Doctor, you feel it necessary when I asked you if Ms. Wuornos told you something to tell me what three other people supposedly told you?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
Because I'm simply asking the witness respond to my questions. Yes, sir. So it's true or not that you read Lori and Barry Wuornos' accounts of her running away from home and truancy prior to the age of 15?
I read their accounts of that.
They in fact said that she had on occasion.
They said that.
Did you accept that account, or was that, or you just simply?
I put that into some kind of, perspective. Yes, I
You also-
read that, I evaluated that, I weighed it, yes.
You also accept some of the defendant's own accounts that she had run away from home.
Yes,
Did you read the accounts of Ms. Wuornos also fighting with other individuals and initiating fights as told by her sister and her brother, Lori and Barry?
I don't recall that coming from them.
Was the source Ms. Wuornos that she was engaged in fights?
It was, she related being engaged in fights after the age of 15. And I don't recall either her brother or sister saying that she had initiated fights prior to the age of 15. And all of these, keep in mind, must be prior to the age of 15.
Did Ms. Wuornos describe to you her fights with the Dawn Neiman?
I read the account that Dawn gave. I asked Ms. Wuornos about that.
And then in fact, Dawn Neiman indicated that they had actually fights with knives prior to the age of 15?
She indicated one fight, and that I recall, and I don't recall that she gave an age, but it was after Ms. Wuornos had, according to Dawn Neiman, begun prostituting.
And at the age of under 15, isn't it a fact that Ms. Wuornos also found herself to be scarred by a fire that had been set?
Yes,
Isn't it a fact that in both Lori Grody and Barry Wuornos' accounts that fire was set by Aileen Wuornos?
okay.
If you recall.
No, I don't recall Barry's. I recall Lori account and Ms. Wuornos' account.
Isn't it a fact that in those accounts there were other allegations that Ms. Wuornos had been setting other fires?
That account, yes, there was from Lori, not from the school.
Isn't it a fact that the defendant, through the course of your interviews with her, lied often to you?
Did she lie often to me? In my clinical opinion, no, she didn't.
So you believe she told you the truth always?
No,
Sometimes she lied, sometimes she told the truth.
Sometimes she told the truth. Sometimes I believe she told the truth as she believed it to be. And sometimes I have questioned.
But she wasn't delusional, was she, when she recounted the events to you?
No,
She wasn't hallucinating.
no, something else entirely.
And you didn't bother to check to see whether or not her accounts of what was happening between she and these other people was accurate based on any physical evidence, did you?
Objection, argumentative, asked and answered, Your Honor.
Rephrase your question.
Did you review any physical evidence, any autopsies, anything other than what Ms. Wuornos told you happened between she and these men to verify her story to you?
The investigative reports.
Oh, well, the investigative report certainly didn't indicate any assertion by Ms. Wuornos that she claimed to have been raped by Richard Mallory, did it?
You asked me if I had read anything to try and match her story to the physical evidence. Is that correct? Did I understand you? Maybe I
correct.
misunderstood.
No, I think you
Okay.
understood.
Okay. And I said I read the investigative reports. That's all. Autopsies? No. But the investigative reports in terms of which gave some physical evidence.
So you don't know whether or not the autopsies and the physical evidence that would be revealed from those autopsies would be consistent with her accounts to you?
Objection, Your Honor. I asked and answered beyond the scope.
Overall, activity.
Not from that source. No, I don't.
Isn't it a fact that during Mr. Barry Wuornos' accounts, he described numerous times when Ms. Wuornos had stolen articles from his homes and from other people?
I don't recall that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I don't recall that. I recall him saying that he asked her to leave.
During the course of your reading Barry Wuornos' account, wasn't one of the reasons he asked her to leave was a discovery that she had stolen from his wife? Does that help to refresh your recollection?
No, that was not it said she made a general pest of herself and wouldn't clean up after herself and share in the household responsibilities or do her part. And so he asked her to leave. That's my recollection.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I may not be recalling it accurately, but that's my recollection of it.
You were aware that the defendant was using numerous aliases.
I was aware of these two,
Objection, asked and
yeah.
answered, Your Honor.
Overall,
Were you aware that she was in possession of items of stolen identification?
Yes,
And she had recounted that to you?
yes,
And that she used this identification under
Yeah.
alias names?
yeah.
She indicate to you how she'd obtained some of those by stealing them?
Let's see. One, she told me a gentleman had given her his wife's identification. That was the one, I think they were down in the Keys. She got that one.
And then she used that identification, didn't she? She used that name.
She used the name. I don't know whether she used the identification or not, but she had used the name. I
Tell you
can't
what-
remember how she got the other one, Mr. DeMore.
Don't recall.
No, I don't.
Do you know of at least two she told you about?
Two.
Now, would it be fair to say that her pattern of work since the age of 15, that she has not held down a consistent job?
Correct. I'd say that's fair to say.
And that would be based upon her self-reporting, wouldn't you? You really have no other verifiable source other than the defendant on that.
The deposition from Ms. Moore.
All right, so we are in agreement then that she was not holding down a job on a regular basis.
Objection, Your Honor. I just asked and answered.
standing objection.
But you also had her family members that indicated that she was not capable of holding down a steady job, or had not held a steady job.
Insofar as they knew, yeah, but that was a lot of years ago.
And isn't it the fact that you were aware of her arrest history?
Yes,
And that arrest history indicated that she had repeated offenses.
yes.
Why don't you tell us what she described to you as her offenses that she had been involved with?
Armed robbery in 1980. And that's the one that she was sentenced for. Petty theft in 1978. Dropped. Concealed weapon when she was 18 or 19 years old. And that was dropped, but she did have a suspended license subsequent to that same charge. A grand theft auto in 86, which was dropped, and in 1984, uttering a forged instrument, bonded, it says bonded, picked up, ROR'd, and then questionable.
She had a history of criminal activity, though, did she not?
Yes,
And then you had the present crime that she's involved in.
yes.
Would you consider the crime that she's now been convicted of to be something that is an escalation from a prior criminal history?
I would call that qualitatively different.
So in other words, an armed robbery would be not in your mind any different than a first-degree murder?
No, I'm saying I would consider first-degree murder qualitatively different from anything else that's happened.
Significantly indifferent?
Yes,
Significantly worse?
yes.
So going in and robbing somebody with a gun in your mind would not then be a bad offense?
Objection, Your Honor.
But when you say significantly different, you're talking about an armed robbery with a firearm. Would you consider that to be a severe offense?
Yes,
But not as severe certainly as a first-degree murder,
correct?
coupled with an armed robbery?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the defendant's current jail records?
I've read them.
And don't they...
And let me say, I've gone over them. I didn't read that stack word for word. I certainly read those that were attached to a deposition, and I leafed through the rest of them.
Were you familiar with any reports of defendants threatening individuals to claim that they had raped her?
That she threatened that she would claim that that they had raped her.
That's correct.
Yes, I am.
And when were those events, when did they occur?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the...
Would the fact that the defendant threatened individuals with the crime of rape affect your opinion in any way as to whether or not she was telling the truth or lying as to the
Objection,
murder of Richard Mallett?
objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
Would you describe Ms. Wuornos as being irritable?
Yes,
Would you describe her as being aggressive?
when prompted.
In fact, when you first met her, she was some 35 or 40 pounds heavier, was she not?
Yes.
She was a rather imposing figure, was she not?
You're asking my opinion? No, I didn't see her as an imposing figure. No. That, I guess because that was not solid weight. It was not healthy weight.
Isn't it a fact, Doctor, that this defendant throughout her life's time has led a life of manipulation and lying and the use of aliases?
Objection, Your Honor. Unless the doctor formulated an opinion to reasonable certainty on that issue.
Manipulation, yes. Use of aliases, she has done that from time to time. Lying, I have no data that says that that's Ms. Wuornos' usual way of interacting with the world.
Would you consider that when someone identifies themselves as someone that they're not, that they're lying?
I said use of aliases.
So that would be a form of a lie, would it not?
It's deception, yeah.
So she has a history of deception
I'm
and
saying
lying.
she's done that from time to time, yeah. Yes.
Do you feel you're able to tell when she's telling the truth?
I'm not going to say I can always tell when anybody's telling the truth all of the time.
So you can't tell whether or not Aileen Wuornos was telling you the truth as she recounted the events of the night of the killing of Richard Mallett.
In my clinical opinion, I can tell in my clinical opinion, I can tell when she thinks that she is telling the truth to a reasonable degree of psychological probability.
But whether or not that is the truth does not matter to her perception. Am I correct?
Her perceptions of the situation is much more important, much more relevant to me at that point than the objective truth, whatever that may be.
Doctor, would it be fair to say that if Richard Mallard was seated behind the wheel of his car and he had his hands up on the wheel and was passed out asleep, that you couldn't tell us whether or not that is the truth or not the truth when he was shot?
That's true, I cannot tell you that.
You can't tell that based upon the self-serving statements of the defendant to you, can you?
Can I tell that upon the statements of the defendant, how he was? No, I can only tell you her perceptions as she related them to me.
And what she related to you were actions of irresponsibility, of taking no responsibility, that it was all somebody else's fault.
Well, yeah, Ms. Wuornos does not see herself as, does not appreciate her responsibility of being in that place at that time.
Ms. Wuornos doesn't accept her responsibility as being any place at any time, based upon your testimony. Isn't that true?
Objection, Your Honor.
In Ms. Wuornos' eyes, it's everyone else's fault.
Objection, Your Honor.
In the case of the killing of Richard Mallard, isn't it a fact that she accepts no responsibility for her actions?
Objection has been answered, Your Honor.
You found the defendant to be competent to stand trial, did you not?
Yes, sir, I did. Qualified, as you recall.
Not insane.
No,
Your Honor,
not
has been
insane.
answered, I think, objection a couple of times already.
So if I understand your testimony, if the defendant feels threatened, she reacts.
Yes.
And whether or not her perception of that is the reality or the truth of what is actually happening, it's based upon her perception, and that excuses her actions in your mind.
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, doctor, does it matter what really happened, or does it matter what she tells you happened?
Both?
Well, doctor, if Lee Wuornos had been anally raped and sexually abused by Richard Mallard, and she was really defending herself, you wouldn't need to have any type of dysfunction of mind to call that self-defense, would you?
Oh, Judge, objection.
You have no idea what happened out there between she and Richard Mallard based upon what she told you, not do you?
Objection has been answered.
Would it be fair to say that this is a primitive, violent, vulgar individual?
Objection to the last one, Your Honor.
Primitive,
Yes, she's a very psychologically primitive individual.
acts out violently,
When threatened, when she perceives herself to be threatened.
whether or not she actually is.
It's true of all of us. Whether or not she actually is.
It's true of all of us.
Yes, it's our perceptions in all cases, with all of us. It's our perceptions that dictate our behavior.
So whether or not the reality of the situation is occurring, it's simply based upon her perception of it.
Her behavior is going to be determined by her perception.
So
Yes.
therefore, she's not responsible for her behavior.
Objection has been answered, Your Honor.
If you could answer that.
I'm not saying that. I am not saying that she is not responsible for her behavior. If I felt she wasn't responsible for her behavior, I would have said that my clinical opinion she was insane. That's not what I'm saying.
You said that she couldn't. You said that she could understand the nature and the consequences of her acts at that time.
Yes,
And you said that she knew the difference between right and wrong.
yes,
There's no doubt about that in your mind.
no.
And she had the capability of conforming her conduct in a lawful manner that night had she chosen to do so, could she not?
That's not what I'm saying. My clinical opinion, no.
And that's based upon her perception.
Yes,
Whether or not that's the reality of the situation or not.
That's been answered, Your Honor, a bunch of times. Objection.
Judge Mecklenburg.
Yeah.
Did Ms. Wuornos tell you why she was a prostitute?
She gave me several reasons why she was a prostitute. She told me that she couldn't work because there were warrants out for her, so she couldn't get a job. She told me that she loved men, that she loved having sex with men, that it was good money, that she enjoyed her clients, that she enjoyed all the people that she met.
She received gratification from what she was doing,
Yes,
and she chose to do it because she liked it.
among other reasons. She enjoyed that contact.
Did the defendant tell you that she had practiced getting her gun quickly out of her purse?
Yes, she told me at one time she had practiced.
She called it a quick draw. She whipped out the gun.
Objection, Your Honor.
Overall, action 13.
I don't recall, that may be true, I don't recall.
She told you she practiced over and over again getting her gun out of her purse. Did she?
Asked and answered, objection, Your Honor.
Overall, action 15.
She told me she had practiced getting it out quickly.
Doctor, in your opinion, is Lee Wuornos' ability to understand the nature and the consequences of her actions impaired to the extent that her normal faculties were impaired by alcohol?
Alcohol makes all of that, all of her, the cortical dysfunction and the borderline personality worse, it simply exacerbates it. So yes, there's an effect from alcohol.
Isn't it a fact, Doctor, that Lee Wuornos told you on different occasions that she had either 1 or 2 mixed drinks
No, well, okay, 1 or 2 mixed drinks, yeah.
and up to 4 or 5 beers that evening?
Yeah, I don't recall that changing, but yes.
Did alcohol cause the killing?
My clinical opinion, it did not cause the killing, no.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further.
Just a couple of questions, Your Honor. Are people with borderline personality disorders offensive to other people?
I think the way it's usually phrased is that they tend to cause strong reactions in other people. Generally, this would be negative reactions, or frequently is negative reactions.
What did Tom Evans tell you about Ms. Wuornos?
Objection, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Your Honor, I'm just trying to cover the question asked on cross, if I may.
No, go ahead.
Judge,
Let me learn part of your question, Your Honor.
Yes, I believe there was objection sustained.
that's correct, Judge.
I'll say it again.
Did you rely on Tom Evans's account in formulating an opinion in this case? In your opinion, did you account for what Tom
Oh,
Evans?
yes.
Are accounts of individuals who have come into contact with the client something that experts normally rely on in formulating an opinion?
Yes,
You recall on cross-examination, you were asked a question or two about speaking to Mr. Evans.
yes.
What did he tell you that you relied on?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Same questions with regard to the cousin, Your Honor, to save time, would you be sustaining the objection?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Judge. You indicated that Ms. Wuornos loved men and expressed that to you as far as her hitchhiking and prostituting.
Yes,
Are what you understand her interaction to be with men while prostituting consistent with the way prostitutes are?
no.
What's inconsistent about that?
The very fact that she enjoyed it, stated that she enjoyed it, stated that it was both physically and emotionally gratifying for her, that stated that she would spend more time with them than the contract that she had with them, did things like holding hands, kissing, affectionate type of behavior. This is not typical. Most clients that, I would say all clients, consistently, clients that I have had that have prostituted for any length of time, it has been an extremely negative experience for them, something that they didn't like, the interaction, and would not get gratification from it, but rather tend to falsify that impression.
These perceptions that Ms. Wuornos had about holding hands and affection, hugging, all of these kind of things, are they consistent with her being primitive?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
In what sense?
Two. One, that she would want that kind of physical contact, tactual contact, and enjoy that even from a stranger. It's like if you're hungry, you don't care who gives you the food, if you're starving. So that, plus the fact that it was a way of obtaining it without the close interpersonal relationship that goes with a long-term sustained relationship. So in that sense, it's the borderline and it's the primitive. It's both sides of that. They oftentimes try and obtain have some kind of a relationship that they can distance the individual as well as have them close, distance them and have them close. They tend to yo-yo people. So this is a nice way of doing that in the sense of getting your needs met without having the demands, if you will, of an ongoing interpersonal relationship with them.
What was your understanding of Dawn Neiman's account regarding Ms. Wuornos' developmental years? Of Dawn's account?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the rest of
Dawn's
it.
account regarding Ms. Wuornos' developmental years.
She had become friends with Ms. Wuornos basically through Ms. Wuornos' brother and sister. And then they had sort of palled around together for a number of years, according to Ms. Neiman. That Ms. Wuornos had been very protective of her, that she had, would say to her one or more times during the day, you wait here, I'll be back after a while, I gotta go do some things, and come back with money. And Ms. Neiman assumed that she was prostituting. That sort of fascinated her because she had never known anybody who was a prostitute. Related that Ms. Wuornos always carried a weapon when she was out on the streets. They spent time hitchhiking around places all around town together, and that I believe she said Ms. Wuornos would buy things for her from time to time. They had gotten into a fight, according to her, in which Ms. Neiman had come out the winner.
How old were they at that fight? Or how old was Lee at the time of the fight, from what you can piece together?
Well, from what I can piece together, she would have had to been over 15 because she was already out prostituting and not in school. Now, keep in mind, Ms. Wuornos has a different account of that, but that's Ms. Neiman's account. They drew apart when Ms. Neiman met the man to whom she's currently married. Ms. Wuornos, as she describes the Ms. Wuornos' response to that, I guess from a clinical point of view, I'm seeing her as sort of getting kind of jealous of the fact that Ms. Neiman, who had never had a boyfriend, now has a boyfriend, and also feeling somewhat rejected. So she pulls apart, away from her, somewhat angrily.
You indicated, Mr. DeMore asked you a number of questions about Lori and Barry Wuornos' account.
Yes.
You indicated there were other accounts other than Ms. Wuornos' which were not consistent with Lori and Barry's. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Regarding the family? What were those accounts about?
Both from the cousin and from Ms. Wuornos' biological mother.
And in a nutshell, what did they relate regarding the grandfather?
The Jekyll and Hyde side of him when he was drinking. The fact that he was verbally abusive to the children. Don't have anybody that says he was physically abusive, but that he was verbally very abusive to the children. The compliance that he not only drank heavily, but forced her mother to drink. And that the family, and this comes from somebody else also, but the family basically after her mother's death, her mother's family then ostracized her father because of feeling that he was responsible for her death due to the alcohol.
You had a number of written statements from Lori.
Yes.
And a number
Well,
of
what do you mean by written?
written statements that investigators had taken.
Oh, yes.
They were
I'm sorry.
typed up.
Yes, yes.
You had one by a fellow by the name of Goretzky, a law enforcement officer up in Michigan.
Yes.
One from an investigator named Paget, guy out of Citrus County, an investigator,
That talked to her mother?
that talked to Laurie and Barry.
If that's in that package.
You had more
yes.
than one from each.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
you had a couple of statements and the deposition from Ms. Moore.
Yes, and the statement from her mother.
Did you review all of those documents in formulating an opinion?
Yes.
From a perspective, withdrawn, in looking at Ms. Wuornos' developmental history, looking at that, does it really matter if at the age of 14 she became pregnant as a result of a rape or just became pregnant, given what happened to her during the course of the pregnancy?
In terms of reflecting the dysfunction or a dysfunctional situation, no, it doesn't matter.
What is it?
Either you have a youngster who at 13 or 14 was raped, or you have a youngster who is out sleeping with somebody at the age of 13 or 14, which is inappropriate sexual behavior for that age. That says something about not getting their needs met at home. It says something about their developmental background. It says something about the inappropriateness of that type of behavior at that age. It also the fact that she was not comfortable telling her family until she couldn't not tell her family.
What does that say?
It says that she did not have a relationship with her mom and dad, with her grandparents, that while it may have been very beneficial to her in many, many ways, that it was not one that spoke of security and trust and feeling that your caretakers will help you. They may be very angry at you at the moment, but that ultimately they will stand behind you and will help you, and that you can go to them when you're in difficulty regardless of how you got into that difficulty. It does not bespeak that.
Is she good at manipulating?
Yes.
In what sense?
Is she good at manipulating? Let me rethink that answer. Answer too quickly. Does she manipulate a lot? Yes. Is she good at manipulating? In my clinical opinion, she's not all that good at it. I guess that's, when you asked me, is she good at manipulating, my thought was, does she do it a lot?
Tell me
Yes.
about manipulating a lot first.
Ms. Wuornos doesn't have many. I don't think she has any. Healthy, adaptive, interpersonal skills for getting your needs met. When we don't have that, we rely on what do we know? Well, every child knows how to manipulate. That's one of the things that we learn when we're very, very young, and it's the way we first start getting our needs met. Now, hopefully, we grow and we learn other ways, more mature ways of getting our needs met, although we all manipulate to some extent all the time. I mean, we all do that and we accept it. If I say good morning to somebody, I expect, and one of the reasons I'm saying that is so that somebody will say good morning back to me. That's a socially acceptable manipulation. We all agree to those manipulations. Okay, so we all do that at some level, but hopefully we basically try and get our psychological needs met in more mature ways. Ms. Wuornos does not have those more mature, adaptive, healthy ways of getting her needs met, and so she does it by manipulation. But frankly, she's not real good at it. And I'm saying that because it's obvious that she's manipulating. And when people are good at it, if you know that you've been manipulated, it's only later. And then we're usually kind of pretty angry at the fact when we suddenly realize I've been manipulated. Sometimes we can be manipulated and never know it. That's when somebody's really good. But with Ms. Wuornos, it's pretty obvious that that's what she's doing. It's kind of like when a child tries to manipulate, and a child, we usually think it's kind of cute, but after a while we think it's not so cute if they as they get to be older and they haven't learned better ways of doing things, we generally don't think it's so cute, and we don't think it's cute at all in an adult, generally.
The neuropsychological and psychological testing that you provided to Ms. Wuornos, does that have mechanisms by which malingering or faking can be checked?
Yes,
Did you employ those mechanisms in this case?
yes,
Was the testing valid?
yes,
Any impression that Ms. Wuornos was not trying her best in the testing?
no, no, she was trying her best. And everything that has any kind of validity measures, they're all valid. And let me, the same is true of her school records. They make the same statement that she tried very hard on the tasks. She tried certainly on mine. Everything that I understand is she's tried hard on all of them.
Thank you, Doctor.
Further on.
Ready to speak the witness further into the discharge.
We might need that, Your Honor, but if the witness can return to her office temporarily.
And this is the lawyer who is getting it out. Correct. You are the rule, not the slave.